Well, good morning and good afternoon. And I see Corinne from Santa Cruz is here. So wonderful to see you. And I also want to just say a thank you to Jack for donating a laptop computer to Twining Vines. It means that we now have got a screen here in front of the speaker, as well as one showing the Zendo. So thank you so much. We put it to use immediately. Today I'd like to speak a little bit about resistance. Someone in the Sangha asked if I would talk about resistance. We could say that dukkha, suffering, is resistance to reality, resistance to the world as it is. That when we resist things as they are, we suffer. Which is not to say that accepting things as they are is not painful. Accepting things as they are can be quite painful because we have a body, and a body is impermanent, and so is everything else that we experience. So accepting things as they are also can be painful. But resisting things as they are is a lot more painful. It's a whole additional experience of suffering. And as a simple example, if we had a plan to do an activity outdoors, a picnic or something like that, and then it rains, that might be disappointing. So we might feel some pain that our planned activity couldn't go ahead the way we wanted to. But we could come up with an alternative plan. We could adapt. We could pivot in that moment to incorporate the rain. And so we would be still able to do something. So acceptance doesn't mean inactivity, doesn't mean passivity. But if we stayed stuck with being upset about the rain, bemoaning the fact that it was raining, and maybe come up with some theory that it always happens to me, or something like that, we would definitely suffer a lot more than if we just decided to do some indoor activity or find a shelter, shift the location. So that's just a very simple example of how resisting the way things are adds a layer of suffering to the inevitable suffering of our being in a world of impermanence. So as practitioners, our task is to notice what it is that we resist. I wouldn't say the task is to stop resisting. The task is to notice what are the things that we resist, and just to simply notice that and be curious about our resistance. There's a lot of things I think we resist habitually because of our karmic tendencies, because all of the things that have happened throughout our life, and we don't even notice that we resist them. So as practitioners wanting to be of service to the world, our first task is just to become more curious and aware of the places where we have resistance to the way things actually are. the way things are in terms of ourselves internally, the type of person we are, our skill sets and so on, and to things externally. It's a little bit like if we have clay to work with, we've got clay to work with. If we wish that the clay was wood, or wish it was metal or sand or ice or some other thing, it wouldn't be very fruitful for us, because what we've got is clay. That's what we have clay. But we can work with that clay. It's not that accepting that it's clay means it just sits there as a lump of clay. The world as it is, like a lump of clay, can still be worked with. We can still influence how it's going to be in the following moment. But the first step is to recognize that this is the clay that we have, that this is what we have. The whole world has not woken up to the climate emergency. That's the clay that we have. There's injustice in the world. That's the clay that we have. One of my very favourite koans from the Blue Cliff record is case 32, Elder Ting stands motionless. Elder Ting asked Lin Chi, what is the great meaning of the Buddhist teaching? Chi came down off his meditation seat, grabbed and held Ting, gave him a slap and then pushed him away. Ting stood there motionless. A monk standing by said, Elder Ting, why do you not bow? Just as Ting bowed, he suddenly was greatly enlightened. So I'll go through line by line. Elder Ting asked Lin Chi, the great teacher Lin Chi, what is the great meaning of the Buddhist teaching? And this question gets asked a lot in these Zen stories. And we can ask ourselves that question and come up with all sorts of different responses, because there is no one response. We can deeply contemplate, what is the meaning of the Buddhist teachings? Or what are the Buddhist teachings? And we can rest without trying to specifically find an answer. We can just rest with the question. So Elder Ting asked this question of Lin Chi. I imagine as wanting to create an opportunity for a Dharma exchange. So Elder Ting was in a receptive state. He was wanting to engage with his teacher. And Lin Chi comes down and grabs him by his robes and gives him a shake and a slap, which, as all of us here would know, that that shake and that slap is an expression of, is an answer to the question, what is the meaning of Buddhist teachings? And he gives him a shake and a slap. A very present, in this present moment. You would not be distracted in that moment when your teacher, who you love and revere, steps down and right in front of you gives you a shake. You wouldn't be thinking, oh gosh, I must remember to take the trash out tonight. That's not what your mind would be doing. You'd totally be there. So why I love this case so much is there he is. Elder Ting is in this moment. He's like frozen. And it's an extremely pregnant moment. He's there. There is no cognition happening in his mind. And in that moment, his mind could go in a number of directions. It could go into resistance. It could go into something to do with self-identification. Why did the teacher do this to me? Or now I feel embarrassed. I'm in the middle of the zendo and the teacher has shaken me in front of everybody. His mind could have fallen into dualistic thought. So he's just there. And in this incredibly pregnant moment where he's being invited to have no resistance at all to anything. This is why I love it so much. Another monk in the Zendo recognizes this pregnant moment. This other monk sees that Elder Ting is there with his mind completely kind of empty, but about to fall one side or the other, about to fall one way or fall the other way. And that monk, with this beautiful Sangha love, this beautiful brotherly love, can be sisterly love, in that moment says, Ting, why don't you bow? Just offering him a moment to, it's like a little tip. He's giving him just a little tip so that Ting will not fall into resistance. And so Ting bows and is greatly enlightened, as so often happens in these wonderful stories. So we have this opportunity to be like Elder Ting, that when something comes in front of us that we feel an urge to resist, we can decide not to resist the bare fact of it. To not resist is not saying to endorse and be passive and allow whatever is in front of you to necessarily continue. That's not what not resisting means. It means to be willing to fully 100% be with actually what is happening. And from that place, then action can then follow. So just going back to this sort of metaphor of clay, we think of clay as ourselves. We can ask, is this a sort of workable piece of clay? Can I do something with this piece of clay? Of course, yes. The answer is yes. Whoever I am, with whatever my capacities, whatever my karmic history, no matter what is stored in the storehouse in the Alaya Vijnana, it's workable. It's not workable. It's very important for us to trust that whoever we are and whatever our circumstances, that is it's a workable lump of clay. It might not be always fun working with this piece of clay. It might be quite difficult. And in many ways, being practitioners, we are welcoming difficulty. We welcome having discipline. We welcome hearing the teachings that often are counterintuitive. We welcome the teachings that are asking us not to resist, not to avoid, not to procrastinate. The teachings are inviting us not to do those things. We can still do those things. It's okay. We can still do those things. And they'll be curious about that when we do them. But we are being invited to really be with the world as it is. And that is difficult. It's wonderful, wonderful and difficult. It's a kind of difficulty that we can enjoy. So if we do start to notice our different resistances, the first thing is to notice them, then be curious about them, be kind towards our resistances, our habitual resistances. And in a way, that's kind of all we have to do. If we are curious and kind towards them, we will naturally move towards maybe wanting to be a little more wholesome, which would usually mean being a little less resistant to whatever they are. And that just unfolds. It's kind of Buddha nature is expressing itself. It just does it anyway. You know, if we bring awareness to it, it just does it anyway. just got a phone making some sounds over there. Good. So just to give an example of one of my own resistances, and it no doubt relates to a whole childhood series of events growing up that then migrated with me across the decades. But I do have a bit of a resistance to bureaucracy, as do many other people. But I somehow like to think that I have more of a resistance. It's probably not true. And just so noticing that, what I used to do in the early years is I didn't really notice it. I simply surrounded myself by partners that could do those sort of things for me, and I didn't do them. So I didn't even really notice. I just found that I was actually drawn to people who were good at that sort of thing. It was part of what I liked them. They could do that stuff for me. I wasn't even fully conscious. Be like, oh, they're so good at computers. I like them. It's kind of crazy, really. So then later on in my life, when I decided not to repartner with anyone, I really had to say, okay, so now the buck totally stops with me around this issue. I need to work with this resistance to bureaucracy. And one of the things I did was actually just learned how to spell the word. So let me see if I get it right. Bureaucracy. I think that's how you spell it. So befriending the enemy. I know how to spell you. Yeah, so I've improved and improved over the years. I doubt that I'll ever be completely comfortable with it. But it's just an example of being friendly and curious towards our resistances and trusting that our practice will steer us in the right direction to attend to them for our own benefit, because we are one of the many beings, and for all the beings, because we have taken that vow to save all beings, including this particular one. Oh, so that's an example of like the internal sort of our internal resistances in ourselves, but we also tend to have resistances to things externally to ourselves. And I think one of the most common ones is we don't kind of like it if people have a different opinion to us about something. And that might be one of the biggest resistances we have in terms of the external world, maybe. When I think of all the things that people tend to get distressed about, it's usually to do with what other people say or think. So another koan of ours, also in the Blue Cliff record, one that many of you would be familiar with, case 43, Tung Shan's Not Cold or Heat. A monk asked Tung Shan, when cold and heat come, how can we avoid them? Tung Shan said, why don't you go to the place where there is no cold or heat? The monk said, what is the place where there is no cold or heat? Tung Shan said, when it's cold, the cold kills you. When it's hot, the heat kills you. So the monk's first question, when cold and heat come, how can we avoid them, is a question about resistance. How can I avoid the things that I find difficult? You know, being overly cold or overly hot is not very pleasant. So the monk's asking, how can I avoid them? Where can I go to avoid the difficulties of life? And Tung Shan says, why don't you go to the place where there is no cold or heat? And if we hear this just literally, we then can pretty clearly see there is not a place where there's not cold or heat. So what is it that Tung Shan is saying when he says, go to the place where there is no cold or heat? maybe what he's saying is go to the place where you will not resist cold and heat. Go to the place where cold and heat is something that you are willing to be with and willing to attend to. And actually just saying the word attend makes me think too that another way to think of all the things that are difficult, the things that we resist, to actually see those things as kind of friends who are calling out to us. Even, for example, say a person with whom you have a difference of opinion, you can think of the experience of the whole thing, not so much the individual person, but the sense of there is a person with a different opinion to me. That itself could be like a friend, a Dharma friend coming to you to offer you an opportunity to deepen your practice. It's like a gift. You can see it as a gift coming to you. We can see everything as a gift, no matter how pleasant or unpleasant on the level of the conventional world. No matter how difficult on that level it is, we can still see it as a gift. It is a gift. We can remember that that is so. So here, Tung-shan says, why don't you go to the place where there is no cold or heat? And the monk asks, what is the place where there is no cold or heat? Or you could say, where is the place where there is no cold or heat? And Tung-shan says, when it's cold, the cold kills you. When it's hot, the heat kills you. This is just a beautiful, beautiful expression of wholeheartedly attending to whatever arises in front of you. Wholeheartedly letting the ego self go, letting your preferences go, and wholeheartedly just meeting that cold, meeting that heat. And the word kill, is a strong word, but we know what it means here. Let all the delusions about preferences drop away and wholeheartedly attend to whatever's arising, which then might simply be, I need to go and get my cardigan. That might be what you do next. It doesn't mean that you stay there and shiver, but it does mean that you don't get upset about the inevitability of cold. You go off and get a cardigan. Sometime recently, I heard someone giving a Dharma talk and telling the story of a student asking Suzuki Roshi, how would I know if I was enlightened? That was a pretty interesting question to ask. How would I know if I'm enlightened? And Suzuki Roshi just paused and said, you wouldn't complain. You wouldn't complain. You wouldn't complain about the cold. You wouldn't complain about the heat. You'd just go get a cardigan. And if you couldn't get a cardigan, then you would just shiver. That's what you would do. You just shiver. Other things I wanted to say, but we don't have a lot of time, so let me see what I'd like to say for the last bit of time. Maybe I'll read a passage from Catherine Thanis, the late Catherine Thanis, who was the abbot of Santa Cruz Zen Centre, where Corinne is from, and Sarah, who are here today. From her book, The Truth of This Life. It's a collection of her Dharma talks. And she has a chapter called Loving the World as It Is. So this is her voice here. Oh, there's somebody waiting to come in. Okay. Recently, I have come to realize that our work is to love the world just as it is. Because our discriminating mind is constantly thinking of improvements for the world, how I should be, how you should be, to love the world as it is means to completely accept those thoughts and also our regrets about how the world is. Loving the world as it is being willing to be in the only world we know. This is really the point of practice. When we say that everything is suffering, we are voicing the first noble truth, which acknowledges that the reality of our life is fragile, constantly subject to changing conditions. Many of us are experiencing financial, psychological, emotional, social insecurity. When we find it's not in our power to make our lives safe and secure for ourselves and our families, we begin to become aligned with life as it is. Humility and maturity may arise. So that line there, when we find it's not in our power to make our lives safe and secure for ourselves and our families, or any other thing, like it's not in our power to make people agree with us. It's not in our power to wake people up to the injustices of the world. We can't necessarily wake everyone up. We can, if we choose to use our energy that way, see if we can influence other people. That's a choice that we can make. We can choose to work for social justice. We could choose to be a climate activist. We could choose to talk to family members and try and change their mind about who they're going to vote for, something like that. We could choose to do that. But if we do that, we want to do it from a place of first accepting that this is how it is, and that what we may do may not have an effect. It's very important to accept that if we are going to take action, to not be attached to the outcomes of our action. So I think I'll stop there so that there's just a little time for comments or questions.